Okay, with that, we're now going to talk about the good stuff, which is punch and booze and all sorts of vagrants and scandals, and I think there's no better person to give this to. I'm pretty sure that Bethany gives her liver for the job. And tonight is going to be no exception. James, I don't even want to know about your liver. And so I'm really looking forward to this. I don't think there's much introduction necessary, other than to say it's just so much fun working with you, Bethany. I envy all your great ideas and your enthusiasm. If I just had an ounce, I'll just take like a shot glass full of your historical knowledge, because she is always telling me something, and I'm always learning something new from the great Bethany. So Bethany, come on forward. Thanks very much.
I, for one, would like a shot glass of whatever he's drinking that's making all this incredible stuff happen. It's amazing. So, anybody that knows me knows that it is not really in my nature to be speaking about prohibition and temperance. I'm not known for either fond belief in either one of those things. This actually, and if you're expecting a sober and chronological, listing of the history of temperance in Newburyport and in the United States, you will be sadly mistaken, because I tend to go from one absolutely ridiculous story to another. And there are some incredibly interesting, ridiculous stories in this presentation. This actually came because we had done a series at the museum called The History of Old Newbury in 3 Drinks. The first one was beer, where we talked about the 17th century through the prism of taverns, brewing, etc. And then this year was rum, where we talked about the history of Newburyport in the 18th century through the lens of distilling, importing, West Indian trade, etc. So in the course of that, I came across several people who objected vehemently to the amount of drinking that was going on in the city of Newburyport, and the town of Newburyport at the time. Newburyport was not a city until 1851, of course. So I became fascinated with this sort of tension between this town that was absolutely awash in alcohol, and the people really, and it's absurd amount of alcohol was being drunk here, and these people, and there have always been people, rightly so, who protested against drinking to excess, and then turned to protesting against drinking anything at all. And then there's like a pendulum swing where it goes back to people saying, can we just drink a little bit? Like maybe on Friday at the Custom House? I don't know. So I became totally fascinated by a couple of these people in particular. Now, I will say the screen is too small for you to read anything that I put up on my slide. So I have employed the elocution lessons that I paid for my husband, who's going to assist me in the reading of some newspaper articles. So don't feel like you need to read what's up there. It will be read to you. Okay, well, again, thank you so much for having me. I'm Bethany Groff Dorau. I'm the executive director of the Museum of Old Newbury. I'm not a teetotaler. Cheers. All right. So, quickly, we've got a couple of things that I just want to tell you about. In fact, one thing. We have the garden tour that happens in the beginning of June. So this is my only ad, I promise, but if you have not been on this garden tour, we've got some incredible 11 beautiful gardens on this tour this year. So go to our website and buy your tickets. There you go. Now, on to temperance and rum. I threatened to fistfight James Russell at a presentation at the museum because James identified this photograph with all these barrels as possibly whale oil, and I believe they're molasses. So I will challenge you to fisticuffs over that. There's plenty of fisticuffs in this presentation. That's just the first instance. But this was, again, this contrast between a place that was absolutely known for its imports of sugar, rum, West India rum, and molasses, which was then made into New England rum, and also this sort of stream of temperance and prohibition advocates as they went. So in the same town where you have molasses, I believe, coming in incredible quantities, you also have a temperance tavern This is from the newspaper. We're gratified to announce to the public that the Washington Hotel on the corner of Titcomb and Merrimack Streets is hereafter to be conducted on strict temperance principles. The Washington House has been one of the most respectable and well-managed taverns in town, and the landlord is a gentleman well calculated to make his visitors comfortable. We wish him success. And his profit margin just went way down. Way down, which is funny because the Washington House becomes the Ocean House, and there is a bare-knuckle brawl that happens at the Ocean House over just this issue, temperance, a little bit later on. This is from about, I think it's from 1851. And then there's another notice that says the cause of temperance is making rapid progress in this town and vicinity. Our wealthy men are putting their shoulders to the wheel, and the reformed drunkards are laboring day and night. The car must roll on. It has a powerful engine attached to it, and we advise all who would escape from being crushed by its weight to take refuge under the flag of total abstinence. We understand that this flag will soon be hoisted somewhere in the vicinity of State Street. I don't know that ever happened. Okay. I also came across this totally tantalizing photograph, and I'm asking for all of your help to find a better picture of this. This is hot and cold temperance drinks on the corner of Middle and State Street. So I can only see this little glimpse of it, but there was at one time a movement of temperance spas, they called it. Did any of you grow up where like a corner store was called a spa? Yeah. Okay, well, that actually originated, I don't know if it originated, but the temperance spa was sort of a way to seek refuge from places with, you know,
They use the tea from pot.
inebriating spirits. Well, there you go. I'll let them know that you have some design ideas. Okay. Large profits were made from distilling molasses into rum, so New England merchants encouraged the trade of molasses rather than the strict importation of West India rum. By the turn of the 18th century, with distilleries established all up and down the coast, rum began to vie for first place as the most popular alcoholic drink amongst the common people. We can probably imagine that what was the most common alcoholic drink amongst the people before that was beer. At least one historian estimates that by this time, this is the turn of the 18th century, rum was being consumed at a rate of nearly 4 American gallons per year for every man, woman, and child in the colonies. That means that men were drinking 8. Even though New England rum was considered inferior to the West Indies variety and often inelegantly was referred to as the stinking rum. This is in part because if the rum was failing to sort of if it wasn't fermenting properly, you would sometimes throw things into the boil, like dead animals, to get it going. So then distill it. Even in a period of economic recession, as in 1713, the annual per capita consumption of rum in Massachusetts was 2.6 gallons, representing a large home market for this beverage. Demand became so great that the New England merchants began buying up molasses from the French and Dutch islands in the Caribbean, prompting Parliament to pass the Molasses Act of 1733. So this is pre-Prohibition. Here is where the continuing and inexorable link to slavery comes in. Molasses produced by enslaved labor came to Newburyport, is made into rum, which is sent along with other items to Africa, with which to purchase more people to send to the West Indies to make more molasses, etc. Newburyport's primary trade, however, was directly with the West Indies, and molasses and sugar were exchanged directly for fish, livestock, foodstuffs, etc. through most of the 18th century. So you can see this is what we think of as the triangle trade, but it's actually more of sort of the many-headed hydra. There's a lot of branches to this trade. But we were absolutely 100% implicated in every part of that trade. Turns out that the rum that was made in Newburyport and other New England ports was considered the best to actually purchase people in Africa. So New England rum was often, not West Indies rum, was sent over and directly traded for human beings. This is a letter that is in our collection. Is Sharon here? Oh, Sharon, by the way, I wanted to point out, that's how that projector works. Sharon and I had a projector that looked like that, and we had it on the floor, and we had it upside down, and we were trying to figure out how in the blue blazes did you get a picture out of that thing? So as soon as I saw that, I thought, talk to Sharon. So Sharon, as you may know, has long worked in the archives at the Museum of Old Newbury several hours a week, and she has, we have an incredible archival collection, and she's a great resource for us. This letter is from Captain Joseph Tyler, to Captain Joseph Tyler in 1801, and this is just one example of how this trade carries on. This says, "You are master of the schooner Hope, now ready for sailing. Our orders are that you proceed to sea and direct your course for the island of Guadeloupe, and there make sales of your cargo to the best advantage you can, and lay out the best proceeds of your cargo in the produce of the country that will best suit our markets, and meet the best profits. Say a few hogsheads of clayed sugar of the best kind," this is sugar that's literally covered with clay, to preserve it. "The remainder in brown sugars, coffee beans, cotton, and molasses of the best kinds that your discretion will determine. Should you not be able to call at your entered port, you must run for a market. Be sure to make all dispatch back to Newburyport. You can, that your own judgment will direct you." So this is the owner of the ship, the owner of the cargo, telling the captain how to trade the cargo. Oops, I skipped ahead, hold on. This is another, wait. Okay, this is weird. There we go, okay. 1817, this is another collection of letters. And again, this is very clear. It's the fish, it's the lumber. This owner is saying, "As I wrote you in my last, the sales are as follows." This is from the captain back to the owner, sorry. "Codfish, $5. Scale, $4. Alewives, $6. Lumber, $22. Shooks, hoops, beef, flour, potatoes, beets. All to be dispatched in 30 days. Payable, half rum, island proof, the other half molasses, including casks. Empty casks are sold at $5. So there's no denying, we are right up in it. By 1770, on the eve of the American Revolution, there were 140 rum distilleries in North America, the greatest number of them in New England. Newburyport, which in 1764 was set off as a separate town from Newbury, could claim 10, the most out of anywhere except Boston. At its incorporation as a town, Newburyport measured a mere 630 acres, less than a mile square. It was the smallest town in the Commonwealth, still had 10 distilleries. I will tell you, as I was doing this research, there is a number that is often thrown around that Newburyport had 70 distilleries. And in fact, this has been published in several sort of dignified historians' work. It's 10. The 10 in the original manuscript looks like a 7. So this is one of those things where an error becomes a story, becomes the truth. So you will hear, people will say, no, there were 70. I will fist fight that person. I'm angry tonight. I'll tell you, it's just 10. Okay, the only town that had more rum distilleries in the Commonwealth was Boston with 36. The bustling seaport of Salem had only 5, twice as many as Salem. So Wolf Tavern, 3 years after its opening by William Davenport, hosted a rowdy group gathering momentum to fight the Stamp Act. You can't probably read this, but their bar tab is on the left-hand side. And let me assure you that this is all punch. This is double bowls of punch, triple bowls of punch, eggs punch. To the suppers which were cooked hot. It was sort of an afterthought after 27 bowls of punch. And then at the very bottom it says, "To a breakfast of coffee for said company." So the next morning they needed a little bit of help, I think. Okay. So there's a huge distilling boom, 1770 to 1790. There are 10 distilleries. Is Ted Olson here? Ted Olson, who volunteers here at the museum, has done some wonderful work tabulating ships that come in with various cargoes. He provided these statistics. After the Revolution, the basics remained as they had been before. So in this 1 year, 1792, the total ships landings that imported products to the Custom House are 93. The total amount of rum imported in this 1 year is 47,798 gallons in 16 ship landings. The total molasses imported is 354,846 gallons in 43 ship landings. And the total sugar was 219,825 pounds in 43 ship landings. We were importing this stuff like crazy pants. It was, the vast majority of our imports were sugar, rum, and molasses. By 1820, there are only 4 distilleries, but they are cranking. In fact, when Washington processed through Newburyport in 1789, he pointed out that it was pointed out that 10 or 12 distilleries. Anyway, there's a footnote that says, in the procession which escorted Washington on his entrance to Newburyport through the town, the distillers marched as a distinct body. So in the parade, there are 10 distillers marching with Washington. All right. Meanwhile, this is a total aside, but I'm sort of in love with it at the moment. This is a sampler that lists Joseph Poyen, who's actually Joseph Rochemont de Poyen de Saint-Sauveur, who was from an aristocratic French family who had settled on the island of Guadeloupe in the West Indies in the 17th century. Now, what does this have to do with Newburyport? We are buying sugar, rum, and molasses from places like Guadeloupe, especially since now that we are free of British influences and British restrictions, we're buying from the French. So the French Revolution happens, that spreads to a lot of the French possessions, and on the island of Guadeloupe, some of the planters on the island are being murdered or being driven off their property or being sent back to France and beheaded. And so there happens to be all these ties to Newburyport. And so a significant contingent of French refugees shows up in Newburyport. Did you all know this? So the French Revolution is right here on your doorstep. And there's some incredible documents about this. Mon Dieu. Okay, so there's a really... We just found a sampler at the museum that we could not identify. We did a little bit of additional research, and it turns out that the brother of the young girl who's on the sampler was actually baptized in Newburyport, and then they went back to Guadeloupe. So there is this kind of, the refugees are here during that period of time, and a number of them are buried in Old Hill as well. So next time you're walking around, go say hi to the Frenchies in Old Hill. Oh, there's another one. Oh, wow, I went really crazy here. There's actually this is an Old Hill, the Jacques Maistre, who died at 21 years old in 1793. There's whole families that are buried there. This is the last, this is the remnants of a headstone for a family that ended up in Bradford. All right, Moses Brown. Moses Brown was born in Newbury in 1742. He was probably one of the, oh, hello. I didn't do that. One of the most important and wealthy importers and merchants who dealt in molasses and sugar cargoes. We have receipts at the Museum of Old Newbury that detail his imports and exports. Brown made, his fortune primarily in the importation of sugar and molasses, which he in turn sold to several of the town's 10 distilleries, including, of course, his own. In 1807, his wealth was estimated at $275,500, making him the second wealthiest man in Newburyport. Do you know who the first wealthiest man was with Moses Brown? William Bartlett. Absolutely. All right. Fun fact, in 1791, Moses Brown purchased Tristram Dalton's house on State Street, which is now the Dalton Club. He lived there till he died in 1827 at the age of 84. So again, by the end of the 18th century, Newburyport is absolutely awash in rum, and they are being very noisy about it. Oh, I have more stuff up there. Okay. This is one day. This is one day in Newburyport's newspaper, right? This is the day. This is, let's see, October 23rd, 1795. So on this one page, we've got Jamaica Spirit, Jamaican, Windward Island, New England rum, Madeira, Sherry, Gordon, Malaga wines, low Havana, powdered and brown sugars. Great. Then we go rum butts from 500 to 3,000 gallons, hogsheads, new and old, barrels, cider barrels, etc. We've got some, and then this poor guy is just selling flaxseed, right? Except he's also selling West India, New England rum, wines, brown brandy, etc. Oh wait, there's more. We also have Tobago rum. A few hogsheads, Tobago rum and molasses, wholesale and retail, cheap for cash. Oh, there's more. And we've also got Ebenezer Steel selling West India and New England rum, wholesale and retail, etc. You get the point. This is all one page of the paper. Oh, there's more. Okay, that's just French brandy, and then West India rum per hogshead, which is an extraordinarily large quantity of rum. So you all know this gentleman, I hope. This is William Nichols. William Nichols was privateering, and as soon as he knew exactly where to send the sugar, molasses, and rum that he captured. Homebound fleet of 19 sail under the captured the ship Diana. Having a cargo of rum, sugar, and coffee, ordered her to Newburyport. Same day, took the brig Fame with a cargo of rum and sugar, ordered her to Newburyport. September 6th, fell in with the ship Commerce, Watts master, cargo, rum, sugar, cotton, and coffee, carrying for, and again, so he's sending all of this cargo back to Newburyport. All right, enter Alexander Caldwell. You've all heard of Caldwell's rum. Alexander Caldwell came to Newburyport from Litchfield, New Hampshire, and worked for another distillery before establishing Caldwell's Distillery in 1772. His son John joined the business. I think this is the grandson, Alexander Caldwell. I think this is done from a photograph, because if it's really just an etching, they would have fixed his lazy eye. I think, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe they're going through a realism phase, I don't know. The factories were located at the foot of Kent Street. Caldwell's Old Newburyport rum was sold all over the world. And its trademark was the earliest registered rum trademark after Old Medford rum. By the 1870s, the distillery was the only one remaining in Newburyport, but it manufactured almost 3,000 barrels of rum a year, and the rum was popular throughout the United States and abroad. Caldwell's rum remained a successful business from 1772 until Prohibition. It had a little bit of an afterlife after Prohibition. A new company, the Caldwell Distilling Company, opened in 1934 on the west side, on the other side of the tracks, the railroad tracks on Merrimack Street. The original Caldwell family sued them to stop them from using the name. They lost. So a lot of the Caldwell rum bottles, etc., that we see are not from that original Caldwell rum enterprise. But you can still buy a bottle of Caldwell's rum. It is now really cheap rum that is, colored and flavored, but it is still possible to buy Caldwell's rum. The brand is owned by some international liquor conglomerate and comes in plastic bottles. That's not a good sign. Okay. 1826, Caleb Cushing had this to say about the state of the town of Newburyport in terms of its alcohol manufacture. He said, essentially, so the close intercourse of this town with the West Indian Islands gave it early advantage in the importation of molasses and the distillation of rum. The quantity of this commodity manufactured in the town has varied exceedingly at different periods for the last 10 or 15 years. In 1820, when the census was taken, it was calculated that 4 distilleries in the town consumed 3,000 hogsheads of molasses annually. Of the rum produced, it was supposed that about 1/5 was exported to foreign countries and the rest disposed of in the United States, probably right in Newburyport. There may be about 3,600 hogsheads distilled in the present year, etc. So he was very involved in distilling as a business. He was also an interesting, complicated guy. Some say he was a contradictory personality. His attitude towards temperance and the consumption of alcohol bears that out. In 1832, Caleb Cushing was invited to lecture at a temperance meeting in Haverhill, and he said he was heartily attached, both in precept and practice, to the cause of temperance. He also loved whiskey punch more than anything in the world, and also loved his wine and served wine with every meal. So there you go, there's Caleb. And by the way, we all remember seeing pictures of him as an old hoary sage, but this is what he looked like in 1826. So yes, we were all young once, right? Okay, ready? Newburyport Temperance in brief. We actually have this, this place and the Museum of Old Newbury blow me away every time I'm looking for anything. I said to Sharon, I think I'm going to talk about temperance. I want to do a little research. And she came down with 3 of the record books from 3 of the temperance societies that you see listed here, including the Society for the Suppression of Vice and Immortality. I wish it was immortality. And immorality, which was founded in 1812. The Young Men's Temperance Society and the Belleville Temperance Society were founded in 1827. And these are temperance societies. Temperance sometimes meant just drink less. Like, just get a hold of yourselves. But the Washingtonian movement, which was sort of like an early AA, it focused not on the drinking so much as on the drinker. And so this was the pledge. You take a Washingtonian pledge. that you would never again would a drop of any kind of intoxicating anything ever touch your lips. That was the end. You would never do it again, none. And that really started in the 1840s. Before then, temperance societies tended to just want you to calm down. The Merrimack Division, Sons of Temperance, and the Martha Washington Daughters of Temperance were founded around 1845. So the meaning of temperance sort of changes. And temperance, right at the same time, becomes very, very big business. So I don't know how many of you get the Museum of Old Newbury newsletter, but if you do, you have met John Bartholomew Guff. He's awesome. Let me introduce you to John Bartholomew Guff. So John Bartholomew Guff was born in England. He was sent, his father died. He was sent to New York City to earn some money for the family when he was 12. His mother and sister came over and joined him later. They lived in a one-room sort of cold water. I don't even think there was cold water there. There was any water. They lived in a tenement in one room. His mother died. It was a terrible, hard life. And he took to the bottle. And, you know, I told any of you know Scott Nason, I hope you all know Scott Nason. Scott Nason came into my office. He's an old Newburyporter. He was an antique dealer. And I said, I'm doing a talk on temperance. And he said, oh, well, I'm probably the most famous temperance guy who married a Joppa girl. And I was like, what? Who? Oh, yeah, I think his name's Cough or something. And he walks out. And then it's like my whole day's gone because I'm trying to find this guy. So it was John Bartholomew Guff. And what I discovered about him, because the world begins and ends in Newbury and Newburyport to me, is that he did marry a Joppa girl. You see the little notice of a drowning death. Samuel Cheney, who is the father of Mary Cheney, my fifth cousin, drowned on Joppa, and then shortly thereafter, John Bartholomew Guff, having made his way from New York City, having gotten the acting bug, started drinking, and then he decided he would be an actor. I think that's usually the way that goes, right? So he's going to be an actor. He came up from Newburyport, first to Providence, Rhode Island, and then to Boston, and then made his way up to Newburyport. He was a bookbinder by trade, and he would go back and forth. He would be drinking, and he would decide to try to make it as an actor and quit whatever bookbinding job he had, and then he would go, bottom out and go back to bookbinding. So he came to Newburyport, book-bound for a while, managed to get the lovely Mary Cheney pregnant, and then decided he was going to act again, this time with music and an accordion. So the first we see of him in the record is a concert in Amesbury introducing the accordion. It's thought by many to be an instrument that cannot be performed upon. I'm not sure that's entirely true. Okay, and then, so he married, took up drinking again. He describes Newburyport in the 1830s. He describes the underbelly of Newburyport in the 1830s so beautifully. It's his autobiography is worth reading just for his descriptions of the taverns and bars in Newburyport in the 1830s. It's really fascinating. So then he decides to take up with a diorama company. He sort of sings funny songs as the Bunker Hill diorama travels around the state, and then that leads to him ending up in Worcester, and then he sort of falls off the Newburyport scene. But he seems to have continued to have a real soft spot for Newburyport. In particular, in May 1845, he's now a fairly well-to-do temperance speaker. His failed career as an actor served him very well when he went on stage as a temperance speaker. He would put on different voices, he would act out skits from his former life of inebriation, and people would throw money at him. So May 6, 1845, we see a notice in the newspaper. So there are two notices next to each other. Number one, having heard, this is at the top, having heard that it has been stated in the town of Newburyport that various persons there have accounts against me, and I am not aware that such is the case, I, having on various occasions made a public request that all claims against me be sent in for settlement. This is a long thing saying, if I owe anybody money, there's rumors going around that I owe people money. If that's the case, I'll be in Newburyport, hit me up. If I owe you money, I'll pay you off. Right underneath that is an even more fascinating record where it says, I, Jacob I. Danforth, having propagated a report respecting Mr. John B. Guff of Boston to the effect that Mr. G. drank strong beer at my store on the 6th, desire to fully retract the same and to apologize for the course I've taken and expressly state that Mr. Guff never was in my store. This is signed by Jacob Danforth. Now, what you can see on the right-hand side is the date, the actual advertisement for the date that John Guff was doing a temperance lecture with Mr. D. Kimball of Boston. And then you can see Jacob Danforth below, who's listed as a confectioner. Now, by 1845, there was a really fascinating law on the Massachusetts books that you were only allowed to sell strong liquor, spirits, in 15-gallon increments. This was the first prohibition law in the state of Massachusetts. So the idea was that you wouldn't buy it to drink it at the bar. You would buy it, you'd retail, people that needed 15 gallons of rum at a time would buy 15 gallons of rum. But what it led to was an awful lot of cooperative drinking, because people would pool their money and go buy 15 gallons of rum and then have a really, really, really good time. And also, people at bars and taverns were still just selling rum to people. So I think there's almost no chance that he was drinking strong beer. I think he walked into Jacob Danforth's confectionery and got himself a nice strong rum drink, and then Jacob was like, that temperance guy just came in and had a couple drinks. So it turns out the story is extra fascinating. So again, John Guff has come back to Newburyport, given his temperance lecture, popped in to have a drink on his way to the train, and if you look at the map, here's Washington Street in Newburyport, and you can see the Danforth right there, the Danforth confectionery is right across the street from the train. So I'm sure John Guff thought he was just going to hop on the train, half in the bag, and be back in Boston before he knew it. Now, here's what ends up happening. Jacob Danforth, who's only 25 years old, by the way, his father actually owns the business. He starts telling people, can you believe this guy, makes all this money from temperance speaking, and wouldn't you gossip about it, right? He makes his money as a temperance speaker. He came in and had a bunch of drinks in my shop. The word of that gets around town, and then it gets all the way to Boston. And John B. Guff is extremely unhappy, and that this rumor is being spread about him. So he marches into the shop, and he says, with a piece of paper, and says, you will retract this, or it will cost you $500. I will sue you for slander. You can't prove it was me in your shop. Do we know each other? Well, no, but I've seen your face. I went to your temperance lecture. Okay, well, sign this and I'll go away and you'll never see me again, right? And what he signed was that apology that was in the paper saying I never saw John Guff in my shop, right? It was a total setup. So Jacob Danforth is like, wait a minute, he didn't know this was a thing that was going to be in the paper and he was going to look like a jerk. So he tells his side of the story. James, would you like to be Jacob Danforth?
I can do that. You want me to stand for this?
Would you?
I won't.
He's only 25 years old.
I won't stand for this. I'll try without a mic or near the mic. On Tuesday the 6th, a gentleman came into my store with whom I was not personally acquainted, but who, from his features and general outline, I supposed to be Mr. John B. Guff. He called for a glass of beer, which I drew for him, although from my...
No, I know, I'm just kidding.
Oh, okay. Which I drew for him, although from my previous knowledge of this standing in this community as a temperance lecturer, I was somewhat astonished at the fact. At this time, I candidly believed that the gentleman alluded to was Mr. Guff. And in the course of conversation with some of my friends, inadvertently mentioned the fact, not supposing that it would be mentioned by him, and without any intention of injuring Mr. Guff or the cause in which he engaged an advocate, I was soon after called upon by several citizens of the town who wished to know whether or not Mr. Guff had drunk a glass of strong beer at my store. I answered that he had. A report to this effect soon became general against my wishes, but beyond my control.
That's awesome. Well done. So this goes on for several more columns of the newspaper, which I will spare you, but he ends up saying, I do wonder, tell me the true purpose for which he wanted my signature. Did he wish to make it appear to operate against me as a libel in order to extort from me the sum of $50? What happens is, once that apology is printed, John B. Guff comes back in and says, you better give me $50 or I'm going to sue you for slander, and now I have proof. It's in the paper. So it turns into a little bit of a racket. Temperance guy goes to bar, gets $50. Okay. I still love John B. Guff. He's fascinating character. The plot thickens. September 11th, that's September 17th, later on that year, he mysteriously disappeared in New York City. The mysterious disappearance of J.B. Guff, a well-known advocate of temperance, arrived in the city on Friday morning the 5th in a boat from New Haven, stopped at the Groton Hotel. After tea, he dressed and went out and went to the store, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, they list what he was dressed in: a black dress coat and pants, black satin vest, black hat, Legay maker, Boston, boots newly footed. From the appearance of his baggage, it was his intention to return soon. His friends fear that some accident or foul play has befallen him. Mr. Guff is thus described in the handbill: 5 foot 8 inches high, long straight black hair, dark complexion, sharp features, 28 years old, had on a black dress coat, etc. Gold and porcelain studs, gold seal ring with white carnelian, had in his pockets about $230 in gold and notes. The temperance gig pays, my friends. And where was he found? Five Corners, in a brothel. James?
Well, now, Mr. Guff was found in the condition and at the place stated by us on Saturday morning, and that he still remains in a deplorable state, doubtless from the effect of liquor or opium or probably both. The history of the soda water, meeting with an old shopmate, going into Thompson and Weller's and then into a soda shop around the corner down Warren or Murray Street, there being no such thing as a soda shop in either anywhere in the vicinity of Broadway, etc., is to say the least very unsatisfactory. We say nothing of the work in the house of Walker Street, the expenditure of about $150 of his money, and the other inconsistencies of the story in the National Police Gazette Extra of Saturday. They refute each other. Perhaps when Mr. Guff completely recovers his senses and events of the week may come back to his memory as they in reality occurred.
Thank you. So John B. Guff fell firmly and solidly off the wagon and into a whorehouse in Five Corners in New York. And then his story was that he had met up with a former coworker of his who had taken him to a soda shop and poisoned him. And then they went to see the soda shop where he'd been poisoned. There were no soda shops on either of those streets. So he was, he was making a good living. He was going to defend it, and he still wanted to have a drink every once in a while. So there you go. So moving on from John B. Guff, although I could spend the entire day with him, enter Charles T. Woodman. Charles T. Woodman, who is my fifth cousin, the reformed inebriate. He wrote his recollections. He was a Newburyport boy, born and bred. He wrote a book called Charles T. Woodman, Reformed Inebriate, written by himself. In the beginning of the passage says, "My native place is Newburyport in Essex County, a town in former years considered very remarkable for its religious character. I was born on the 13th of April, 1802. My father was a master mariner, whose name was Joseph Hills Woodman. The maiden name of my mother was Hannah Bartlett. My father was lost at sea, as it is supposed, in the memorable snowstorm of October 1804. I then, being 18 months old, the youngest of 6 children left by him." Anyway, so this is sort of a typical revelatory. This is how I got my bad start. My father died. My mother had 6 children. I was put out to work when I was 12. I started drinking with my coworkers, and he actually says something sort of lovely and revealing, where he says, "I was lonely and I started drinking so I could be with my coworkers." He's actually quite a sympathetic character to me. He also says, "I was always weird." He's got a keen sense of his own shortcomings in the world, but you can read this on Google Books. That's Charles T. Woodman, and he died quite young. He died at 43 of general debility, which could mean anything, in Boston. All right. Moving swiftly on. Gosh, I've lost total track of the notes here. Oh, wow. There's a lot of stuff I didn't say. If you want to ever know more about John B. Guff, I'll tell you more about him. Okay, let's see. All right. So this was actually, you may ask what this has to do with temperance, but it does, I promise you. December 17th, 1853, there is a mysterious death at the Merrimack House, which is also, of course, the Wolf Tavern. It's the same place. And this appears in the paper. 2 girls who took lodgings on Friday night at the Merrimack House were found dead in their beds on a Saturday morning. They were girls of good address and appearance and were not unknown to Mr. Drake, the landlord, or his clerk. In inquiry, they were found to be Elizabeth Burnham, alias Bradley, age 20 years, and Annette Sampier, age 19. They were girls of bad reputation and had been recently residing in Seaburg. The facts of the case are as follows. And then there's a long record of how they were found and who found them. Basically, they were found dead at the same time. In 1853, in Newburyport, there was no real police force. There were detectives that could be hired by individual people or companies to keep an eye on their stuff. But what would happen if somebody died suspiciously is that there would be an inquest, and effectively sort of the doctors and important people of the town would get together and they'd have an inquest and try to determine what happened. If it seemed suspicious, it could be kicked up to the medical examiner in Boston, but it took them several days to come out. In this case, a group was convened, they went to Wolf Tavern, they surveyed the scene, and then these two young women who really had nobody to defend them, and no family in particular. One of them had a mother, but she wasn't in town at the time. One of them already had a child who was boarding with someone else in town. The other one was pregnant. I mean, they were really the most vulnerable people in the city at this time. They were brought to the almshouse and they were publicly autopsied, both of them. It's fairly horrifying, but that's what happened in that time. And one of the people that was brought into this committee of inquest was Henry Coit Perkins, who many of us know best because the Museum of Old Newbury holds two of the oldest daguerreotypes in the country. Actually, probably the oldest. No, I'm going to say the oldest landscape daguerreotype in the country. It was taken by Henry Coit Perkins. He considered himself a scientist. He was a medical doctor, an inventor, a very interesting man. He had actually grown up living at the Wolf Tavern. And he was brought into this committee of inquest. And just to give you an idea, later on, the notes from this inquest would be used to train detectives how not to investigate a crime. So he determined that these young women had died of alcohol poisoning, and he determined this somehow, we don't know, because he immediately dropped their stomachs into alcohol. So here's his explanation of how he still knew that they died of alcohol poisoning.
I've studied him a great deal, so I know his voice very well. So here's what he says. I have only to add, although these stomachs were put up for preservation in alcoholic fluid, that according to the laws regulating the process of endosmosis and exosmosis, the alcohol could not have passed from the outside to the inside of the stomachs by this physical property of membranes, since the tendency in all animal membranes, except that of the gizzard of the fowl,
Obviously,
of course, is in the direction from water to alcohol. So that if alcohol was contained in the stomach, and the stomach put into rum, the water of the rum would leave the rum and pass to the alcohol, and thus diluting the alcohol and strengthening the rum.
yeah, seriously. So we all kind of think that Henry Coit Perkins should stick to photography, don't you? Anyway, that does not end there. We'll get back to this case in a little bit. Now, let me just say, I am totally obsessed with this story. It was reported in the New York Times, and they basically said these two young women drank themselves to death. They were women of ill repute, and this wouldn't be newsworthy except they had died on the same day, coincidentally, with each other, right? So everybody in town was like, nah, I'm not buying it, right? And then there was a person that was working at the Wolf Tavern who talked about hearing somebody come in and then leave. There's all sorts of sketchy things about this. So if you want to help me solve a murder.
Can I say there's a good haggis story somewhere?
Oh, stop that. You stop that. No class, James.
Sorry.
All right, we'll get back to the story later. Enter J.E. Wolfe, which I think is a pseudonym, because I cannot find a person who matches his approximate birth and death dates. J.E. Wolfe came to Newburyport and raised some cane in this town. So the first time J.E. Wolfe, who was a noted temperance speaker, this is later, this is 1877, where there are whole troops of professional temperance speakers who make a good living just traveling around, speaking to groups in various towns, like cities like Newburyport. First time he appears in the paper, it says, on Sunday evening, Central Hall was packed to overflowing, and many were unable to gain entrance. Mr. J.E. Wolfe gave a temperance address from a text His remarks were practical and personal. He claimed that men in business were subject to public criticism, and he did not spare particularizing liquor dealers. He then wrote a little pamphlet which he distributed throughout the town, which said things like, "Give Mrs. S as much money as some of our wealthy grocers are in possession of." This is what he called a base rum seller, a woman who's selling rum in her tiny little shop. "Give her as much money as our wealthy grocers are in possession of, and 9 chances out of 10 she will set up as fine an establishment as any on State Street. Give any of the lower grade rum sellers the same chance, and you will soon note a change in appearance in quarters. The rum seller's motto is, or ought to be, money, money, I want money. What care I for the loss of the soul, the destruction of happy homes, the starvation of whole families, the filling up of prisons and almhouses? I want money. And yet men will spend money for that which is not bread." This goes on for many, many, many pages. But he really got himself in trouble. He published a pamphlet called The Word of Truth, where he listed the names of everyone paying special tax for the sale of spirituous and malt liquors for the year 1876 ending April 30th, 1877. And this listed everyone that was selling alcohol in Newburyport and encouraged people to investigate them, throw eggs at their house, close them down, pick on their children, whatever you needed to do to make them stop selling liquor. And so before that, he was actually engaged by the minister of Old South Church, who thought he was really doing good God's work. And then when he came out with this list, and many of the church's parishioners were on this list, the minister, who had appointed him city missionary, they had a little fund, he was briefly the city missionary of Newburyport, relieved him of his job. He was then sued for slander and wound up in the Newburyport jail, where he wrote a truly stirring pamphlet, "A voice from the Newburyport jail, truth crushed to earth shall rise again. Incarcerated for the truth's sake, the devil and his agents rejoicing, hurrah for free rum, terrible facts," etc. But I think the most important thing that he did in his whole life was to illustrate the 5 downward steps of a drunkard in Newburyport. Isn't this the best? So you may start off on High Street with a tiny little glass of liquor. Are you all going to buy this t-shirt when I have it made? Okay, there you are with your little goblet on High Street. Then you're a little bit slightly more disheveled on State Street, but still looking quite genteel. By the time you get to Merrimack Street, you have holes in your pants and you're not really sure what you're doing. Water Street, you can't walk so good. And Elbow Alley, if you weren't propped up, you'd be on the ground. Elbow Alley is basically like across from where the Daily News is. So that was the downward spiral of drinking in Newburyport. I think in my youth it was the whale. It started at the whale. Actually, maybe it's right in the Steak and Stein, and then went to the whale. Okay, so there you go. So he was an inflammatory speaker. He was obviously not well liked in Newburyport, and in fact, there was a notice printed. And I wish you could read this because it's absolutely wonderful. There was a notice printed by J.P.L. Weston, which said, "I wish to call public attention to the fact that a wolf has recently been seen prowling about the city. Not the wolf spoken of in Aesop's fables, who sought a pretext to devour the lamb, but a raging, dangerous wolf with his shaggy coat of teeth bristling all over like porcupine's quills, who fears neither man nor the devil, a wolf who intends to swallow his victims whole, as his appetite demands and occasions require. I wish to ask if there is a gentleman in this community, be he a minister of the gospel, or ever so ardent a friend of the cause of Christianity or temperance, who will tolerate the presence of a cowardly animal like this wolf in their midst." This is also why I think he's operating under a pseudonym. "I, for one, aim to know and believe that an echo will be found in the temperate judgment of the citizens of Newburyport. All good citizens acknowledge the necessity of Christianity and temperance in society, although this wolf appears never to have come within the fold of either the one or the other. I do not know what the others intend to do in order to protect themselves from the wolf. I will, however, simply say that I intend to cowhide this churly knave as often as I may have the occasion in the future." This is the proprietor of the Ocean House, which is the aforementioned Washington House, which became the Temperance Hotel. You see where this is going. So he offers to cowhide him in the newspaper. Okay, that's awfully fun. That was a fun find for your researcher. I am not going to read this to you, and I'm not going to make my poor husband read this to you, but suffice it to say He did in fact cowhide J.E. Wolfe, the proprietor of the Ocean House. First of all, so Wolfe had hired a detective whose name ironically was Blood, and he was in Newburyport protecting Wolfe from people like this proprietor here, J.P.L. Westcott. And so J.P.L. Westcott first beat the ever-living snot out of the detective, and then beat up the proprietor of, beat up Wolfe as well. So that also made it to the New York Times and the Boston papers. There was first, it was called the Newburyport cowhiding case. And then there was a Newburyport scandal. So basically, both of them were cowhided. I'm sure there's some other plural of that. Cowhode. I don't know. Okay. So after leaving Newburyport, Wolfe published How to Fight the Rum Devil, which was his masterpiece, in which he included many scandalous facts about various people in Newburyport. And he wrote part of this. He claimed that he had written it while in the Newburyport jail. So there you go. He lost his case. He lost his slander case. There was a rum seller in town who successfully prosecuted him, and he continued to preach temperance all over the place. He was, even more heroic after that. Okay. So how do these things come together? So this Newburyport murder case, this is in 1853. There is another temperance gathering at the end of 1877. And during that gathering, one of the things that he says in his, one of the things that Wolfe says in his pamphlet is that the rum seller, they're murderers. They're going to meet their murdered victims in front of God. I put that in the wrong slide. Whatever. Underneath there, Reverend Pike says, one morning early, I was passing one of our first-class hotels. I was called in, led to a room, and was one of the first to enter. There lay two young women dead, both dead, their arms tied together by a white linen handkerchief. I was one of the jury of inquest. That is not true. We held meetings of inquiry. Astonishing facts were revealed. He was a bystander. He was not actually in the jury. But no light as to their sudden death was satisfactorily given. Their stomachs were removed and placed in alcohol and sent to Boston for examination. The return, in short, was that they might have died from the effects of alcohol. So, in other words, this case of these two young women was later used by temperance and prohibition speakers as sort of to bolster their case, even though they were not using the actual facts. And then this is my favorite cartoon of all the time because it's sort of where I land, right? So in Newburyport, only for Newburyport, they printed this was printed all over the country, but it did appear in Newburyport, where they were sort of like, here's the intemperate teetotaler who's got tracts and only drinks water and vinegar. Here's the intemperate drunkard, and then in the middle is my husband. true temperance, who just wants a beer. And he's doing all right? He's okay. He's a drunkard. Okay. So I'll leave you with one last little glimpse. Of course, Caldwell's rum continued well into the 20th century. And in 1939, Caldwell's rum, the pendulum had sort of swung back a little bit after Prohibition was ending, and Caldwell was able to say that the production of rum was directly linked to the founding of this country. It was born with the Constitution. So we go back to believing that drinking is the American way by 1939. And with that, I will say I certainly believe in it. I grew up in a household of absolute teetotalers. We did not have cooking sherry in the closet in case one of the great uncles came over and had too much of it. So I am very sympathetic to all versions of this cause, but I err on the side of true temperance. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. Isn't Newburyport fabulous? I love this town.